it helped me to understand, like, especially behind the bar, like, it doesn't matter if you make a good drink if people don't enjoy sitting at your bar, and also for me and what I'm doing, it doesn't matter. Like, I could certainly make cocktails that have ingredients that most people can't pronounce or don't.
I'm your host, Brian McCann, and this is the Road to Wine Expert podcast. If there's one person I could have to make me cocktails all the time, it would be Elliott Clark. And I know, you're like, what, cocktails? I thought this was a wine podcast. But here's the deal. Elliott Clark has built an amazing following as the apartment bartender on Instagram. And in fact, it's the 2 years since we last talked, he's blown up even more. I'm super impressed by his ability to continue to thrive. And if you want to look at someone as a model for leaving whatever sort of nonsense you have behind and jump into your passion, whether that's wine or drinks or some other calling, I'd be hard-pressed to pick anyone who has done it with more success than Elliott. I'm sort of jealous that he does not work at the bar in my apartment, because not only would I love to have one of his cocktails, I would love to hear more from this guy. He is just full of wisdom, and I know you're going to dig his interview. But before we start, one quick little thing, in case you missed it, the Easter egg of last episode, and that's the quest to 1,000 downloads. Here's the deal. When we get to 1,000 downloads of season 1, I'm going to go ahead and do a crazy giveaway of $1,000 of my favorite Road to Wine Expert stuff, books, and resources from guests and friends of this podcast. So what can you do to help? Share episodes that are awesome and that you love, like Elliott's that you're about to hear, or go back and tell people to listen to some of your other favorites. All right, that's my little spiel. Get us to 1,000, and now let me get you to Elliott Clark.
First thing I always start off with is, like, what it is now and what it's become is not what I intended it for it to be. It's kind of funny because personally, I was never really big on social media. So like all my personal accounts or like my personal Facebook account, I'd never posted on it, just kind of somebody that, logged in once in a while. But, apartment bartender was something that I started because I went to New York, and my buddy and his wife have a food blog. And I always thought it was kind of strange / cool that they would make food and take pictures of it and, spend 3-4 hours, writing a blog and doing all this stuff for one meal. So I went and visited him. He lived in Manhattan at the time, and he signed us up for like a cocktails 101 class. And it was, I don't know where he found the tickets or if it was like a Groupon thing, but when I was coming in town, he's like, hey, would you be down to go to this class? And so I was like, yeah, no worries, man. Let's whatever's clever. So we went, and I don't know, the cocktail bug like bit me super hard. And I think at the time I felt like I was missing a creative outlet in my life, so I came home and just bought a bunch of spirits and liqueurs and stuff that I didn't know anything about at the time, and just started teaching myself different classic recipes. As far as the name Apartment Bartender, if you go back, I still actually have like photos on my phone just to kind of remind me of where it all started. But my name at the time was like Elliott makes drinks and EC makes drinks, like super literal, right? And I remember me and my buddy one night where I was making Negronis and all the cocktails I was teaching myself at that point in time. And I remember I said to him, I was like, man, I don't know why I call myself a home bartender. I live in a shitty apartment, And then I was like, I'm just an apartment bartender. And we were a little tipsy and buzzed at that point. And then he's like, oh man, that's really funny. You should change your name to that. And I remember I woke up the next day like, I don't know if I was like, I don't know if I should keep that. It seems kind of funny, like maybe something you would decide in like a drunken stupor, But then he's like, no, I think you should just keep it. So I kept it and it stuck, So that's kind of how the name came about, is by complete accident. And everything that it is now, I've been working hard on it, but I guess you could say it was by complete accident as well.
Well, there's a lot of happy accidents in life.
Yeah.
So
A total happy accident.
I watched some of your YouTube videos, and the first one in particular that you posted on your channel, you allude to, almost starting the project before,
right?
Or a project,
right?
Was that like in any way cocktail related, or was it something completely different?
Man, that was completely different. So when I was in school, so I used to play college basketball, and when I was at UC San Diego playing for a couple years, about a year and a half actually, and then I transferred back to Arizona State University, and I stopped playing basketball. At the time, I guess you'd say, going through a little bit of an identity crisis, right? Because you grow up playing basketball your whole life. That's what people know you for. That's what you know yourself for. And when I wasn't playing basketball, I didn't really know what to do. I didn't know how to just be like a regular student, right? So I remember I started to kind of seek out different entrepreneurial ventures. My dad, very entrepreneurial, owned his own company and stuff. So it was something that I've always been inclined to look into. And so I started a youth mentoring program. I taught social skills and like public speaking and resume building and job interview skills and stuff to teenagers. And so that was a project that I was doing before. And so it started to grow. I started to kind of host seminars and different stuff at local high schools around the Valley, and started to do that. And this was, I want to say it was kind of before Instagram was big. It was before social media was really taking off. Like now you see a lot of online courses and things like that. It was kind of just starting to get into all of that. And at the time, I remember somebody important to me had told me like, hey, I think you should focus your time elsewhere because you're not going to make any money doing this. I mean, how much money can you really make teaching kids social skills? And at the time, long story short, it was just something like I trusted that advice. I was like, oh, okay. And I think in hindsight, in the video that I said, on hindsight, it's still something I think about now. I'm like, man, that was actually a very viable thing, especially with how social media and technology affects us today. That I look back and I think on, man, that I think had I stuck with that, it would have been something. And, we can kind of dive into my views on that later, and how you shouldn't allow how much you're going to make from something to influence your decisions. But, that was a project that I was doing before.
Cool. Yeah. I can totally relate. I had, I was fresh out of college. I graduated in 2008. I was a Spanish teacher, and there were no jobs. Everyone who lost their job and had a teaching degree was back. Right. And, they're like, why hire a young 21-year-old? Right. You can hire like a, 35, 40-year-old with some like real world experience. So I ended up like just scrapping it together, doing a bunch of different things, coaching and teaching and tutoring. And then the tutoring really took off, and I started my own tutoring business, and like in a very similar vein, right? People were like, is this like really a viable business? And it was probably like around the same time where, now I look back and I could have had like an online course or done stuff, but there were no like tools or software that were really easy to do that stuff. So I can totally relate there. And then that led me down a windy path of trying to do the 9-to-5 and ultimately leaving, because very similar, no creativity, my soul had been sucked out of my body.
Yeah, man, it's I have a lot more thoughts on it, but I don't want to kind of derail the conversation towards that. But yeah.
No, I mean, I say go for it. I'm not beholden to like sticking to my questions. I'd rather just have a conversation, because I feel like a lot of people who will be watching this, in my mind are sort of where I was, where they were scared to take like that leap of faith of like, wow, you really care about wine.
Right.
Should you go pursue that as a career? And I ended up just going for it.
Right.
So I think that like the whole thought process mentality, like that's going to resonate with people.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'd love to hear your thoughts, and
Yeah.
let's go down that road.
Yeah, definitely. And it has a lot of, and it's helped a lot with my consistency and persistence and with Apartment Bartender. I think that with anything that you're pursuing, I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? So you don't know necessarily what's next. You don't know what's going to happen. I think in this space, especially, the landscape's always changing, especially with content marketing or any content that you're putting out. And so I've come to believe, and I've come to learn that I think everybody, if you're creating and pursuing something that's important to you and that's adding value to other people, I think it's only a matter of time before that content or what you're doing catches someone's attention. It doesn't have to be a lot of people. It just has to be the right people, right? And I think that everybody is, one or two pieces of content away from kind of that break that they're looking for. And so for me, I felt like in giving up the previous venture that I had, I was too short-sighted, and thinking like, well, if I'm not making this much, I should pursue something else. Or if it's not yielding the benefits I'm hoping to see by X date, then I'm going to pursue something else. Whereas with Apartment Bartender, and it'll lead into how I came across the opportunity to pursue this full time. A lot of the opportunities that have come about, like people ask me, do you reach out to brands? Do you reach out for these opportunities? Are you pitching yourself? And a lot of times, man, I'll just wake up in the morning and things will come into my inbox, and things that completely change the course of where I thought things were headed. And I think none of that would be possible if I wasn't staying consistent in creating and adding value to people today, and I think that's really important with that previous venture that I had, which is, I had a funny opportunity come along. There was a guy that they own a huge sports academy in California now. And actually his niece was one of the students in my course. And at the time, I kind of stopped building up the curriculum, stopped building up the infrastructure. And then this huge opportunity came through, and I wasn't ready for it or prepared for it. And so they went and launched their thing. And it was something that I could have gotten in at the ground level of. It's huge now. But because I hadn't stayed consistent in pursuing what I was doing, that opportunity just kind of went to the wayside, and so that's what I would kind of advise anybody that, may be nervous to make the leap or is doing things and feeling burnt out. It's that you don't really know what's around the corner or who's taking notice. So focus on staying consistent in what you're doing, because the last thing you want is for you to stop and then an opportunity to come and you're not prepared for it.
It's solid advice. I can see why people were signed up for your motivational speaking or public speaking. Well, it's interesting. You talk about sort of, maybe regret's not the right word, but right. That, how ultimately your path changed, and right. You were helping kids with your mentoring program, and now you're Apartment Bartender.
Right.
And it was something you weren't ready for. Does part of you think that now that you've built like the platform of Apartment Bartender, you've got some recognition, and you're a public figure, that maybe, there's an opportunity in the future, right, to come back and come full circle and do that mentoring and those things again, or pursue them maybe in a different light with a little more hindsight and experience under your belt?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And what facet or how that'll look, I don't know yet, but I do my best not to look at it in terms of regret. I think it's just lessons learned. I was young. I was 20 years old, and it was just something that, at the time, I don't think it was the right time, but I think right now I've learned so much, and you can probably testify to this, and a lot of people out there, is like when you pursue something on your own or something like an entrepreneurial venture, a lot of times you spend a lot of time by yourself. And so you're staring like your strengths and your weaknesses in the face, like day to day, and so I've learned so much about what I do well, what I don't do well, and different resources and tools out there available. I think more than anything, I'm kind of learning how to actually scale something, or how to seek out ways to grow something beyond yourself. And that was something that I didn't really understand before. And so I have a lot more experience now that I could take it into other things. And so it kind of, it lets me, or has shed light on why you see a lot of entrepreneurs, they start one thing and then they go and start another thing, and then they go and start another thing. And all things are relatively successful because there's almost a formula to how to go about building a business, or, scaling something. It really is a learned thing. So.
That's cool. And like on that train of thought, you're now at the point where you said you've realized some of the success of like the hard work, showing up every day, producing content, creating stuff. If you can like rewind and go back to like the early days of Apartment Bartender, let's go post name switch when you were Apartment Bartender. What were those days like? What advice would you have to people who are probably like starting out or thinking about like, oh, I want to start a lifestyle blog, or wine, spirit, whatever related blog, Instagram? What advice would you give to them, or experience you might shed some light on?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. It's hard for me to go back. I'll say this: it's hard for me to go back and maybe shed or give advice for people that are starting out with the intention of it being something. Because I will say, when I started my YouTube channel, having had success on one platform and growing my audience on Instagram versus YouTube, starting out YouTube with this thought of like, I want to get to X number of subscribers or whatever, like that's a lot of pressure that you're putting on yourself, of growth and things that you don't necessarily control. Like what you control is the content. So for somebody starting out, I would always say, and if I were to go back, I would hope that I don't start out with the thought of like, I want to be at 30,000 followers by the end of. I don't think you should do things for the following as much as you should do things or pursue creating stuff that you care about. Because there are a lot of times, like whether I had a following or not, whether I was making a dime from this or not, I would still be making cocktails, taking photos and posting it and writing about it. Cause that's just what I just care about it. I nerd out over that stuff. Like I can talk to you all day about all the bitters I have in my bar cart right here and stuff. But I think for people, a lot of people start out now because they want to travel and they see maybe the things that seem a little bit more luxurious about it. Maybe they're not content with where they're currently at. And so they want to start this blog maybe for all the wrong reasons, instead of like, do you really care about lifestyle? Do you really care about fashion? Do you really care about cocktails? Do you really care about food? Because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and if you don't really care about it, like I would say, I give it 3 months before you burn out, if not sooner,
Speaking of creativity and kind of that and caring, because it's obvious you care, you look at your posts, there's a clear amount of thought and, work that goes into it. I think when you make it look easy, like you do, or make it look simple, like it just shows how much work and thought comes in to it. Can you talk a little bit, 2 questions, I guess. The first being, you missed the creative part. Have you always been creative, and what have tools and things did you like to do, while you were playing basketball and doing other stuff? What was your creative calling? And then now maybe walk us through like how you come up with an idea for a post through execution.
Yeah. It's kind of funny you bring that up, because I was just working on my my content calendar for like the next quarter. And so I guess taking it back to when I played basketball, I mean, I've always been an avid learner, so whether it's reading, whether it's podcasts, whether it's YouTube videos, or just asking questions and being very curious. Like I think creativity is not something that I think creativity is something that you can kind of foster within yourself, but it operates best on different feedback loops and different, different collaborations with other people. So like this, I find to be really creative. This, I think talking to bartenders in the industry, or back when I played basketball, watching games, and I was a huge Allen Iverson fan, so I had the cornrows when I was little, and they didn't sell like his little sock or tube that he wore. So I bought a long tube sock and I cut it off and like rolled it up my arms. Like, you kind of get ideas and you try it, and then you try to make it your own and stuff. So now, as far as different things that inspire me, I think in the cocktail community, it's interesting. I kind of break it down by who's my audience. I have some people, or a lot of people that I engage with Apartment Bartender, like the platform, that don't know what simple syrup is, and then I have equally as many people that they don't need my advice on how to make a good drink. They know how to do it. They're making drinks that are 10 times better than mine, but they might have questions about, how do I take a good photo of my drink? Right. So, they're more curious about the content aspect of it, or they're more curious about getting inspiration for what's a good cocktail photo look like. So I try to create content for both of those people. I try to create in different buckets. For me, it's kind of simple recipes that people can make at home, where they don't feel like they have to buy $200 worth of stuff and get a flower that grows on Mount Everest during the springtime. It's like all these crazy ingredients. Like, they just have a simple recipe that they can make for them and their friends. I like to do a lot of home bartending how-tos, stuff like how to make clear ice at home, how to make different syrups. And then also I like to do kind of vlog stuff where I give people a little insight into my life, or give them insight into how I create the content that I do.
Right on.
Yeah.
What are some of the tools that you use, or maybe some suggestions for tools that people can get like the most mileage out of? Like, if you're starting out, you probably don't, an iPhone is probably sufficient, right? But maybe if you're like leveling up, like what tools would you recommend people check out?
Yeah, definitely. I think the tools that you use, and I used to hate when people tell me this, because I just wanted them to give me like, this is what you need. But they would always ask me like, what are you trying to do? And so I think first, the best tool is deciding like, what is it that you're really trying to accomplish? If you just want to take and have just a cool Instagram, or, take cool pictures, you really don't need anything other than a phone. I've seen a lot of people that have huge followings and that, work with some of the biggest brands that only do stuff on their phone. So it's not just about the tool as much as it is like what you create with what you have. But I think if you're looking to level up, just take into account, say somebody wants to create a food blog, or they want to create a cocktail blog or a cocktail Instagram, and you wanted to scale to the point where you're working with brands, whether they're small brands or larger brands. You need a good camera, because I think that for me, I've kind of had an iPhone, I've had the entry level cameras, and I have professional cameras, and I have multiple now at this point. So it's, for me, I've realized that if you really want to bring your vision to life for shots that you want to take, photos that you want to take, things that you want to capture, I think the technology and the tools that you use have to kind of match that. So, definitely an entry level camera at the minimum. I'm kind of team Canon and team Sony. So, I use Canon for most of my photography, and then Sony for video work. And then as far as different tools that you can use, I put out a Drinkstagramming guide. So I give a lot, but for me, as far as like post-production, Adobe products are the standard, like Adobe Photoshop, or Lightroom, and then different tools. There's some cool online tools for design like Canva. I use that quite a bit just for some of the guides that I put out. I use that for quick design stuff. So there are a lot of really cool tools. I can overwhelm people with tools, but I think more than anything, just decide first what you want to accomplish. And then once you have that down, then I would say kind of look into how that breaks down in categories. Because if you Google it, you'll find 30 different tools for each category that you need help in.
Excellent.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think you're
that.
right on. I think your question is the better question to ask is, rather than be like, oh, get this, buy this, do that, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Like, think about what you want to create.
Right.
And then, ultimately, I like the challenge of like having less, you only have so much stuff, right? Like,
Absolutely.
or you don't have the ability to go out and buy, a $4,000 camera and rig and everything else. Like, okay, how do you try and do it on your iPhone?
Exactly.
And, the danger is getting stuck in the YouTube rabbit hole, right? You look up the answer and then you're like 9 things deep and you're like trying to build your own, like rig at home.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, what am I doing? And so I think that getting the idea crystal clear is important, and just having like a singular focus.
Absolutely.
Because you can make stuff work. It might not be perfect, and it might not like exactly what you want, but if you're, within, like 90%, 80% of that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I try to rely on the done is better than perfect, and I think as far as like the tools and stuff, I was talking to a buddy about that, because a good buddy of mine is really into photography, and he can tell you everything about all the settings on his cameras and everything. And he's doing really well with photography and what he's doing. But I was asking him the other day, like, at what point do you feel like diving too much into the tools and the mechanics gets in the way of actually doing something and creating? I think at a point, I remember I read in a book somewhere, I heard on a podcast, like, for any topic that you're looking to master, it said something to the effect of, limit yourself to 1 to 2 resources and then just get after it. Like, a lot of times in the past, I would buy 5-10 books on one thing, and then, at a point you just kind of get this analysis paralysis and you don't do anything, but the key is like, pick a tool and go with it, and you'll kind of figure it out as you go.
I totally agree. And you got to just start somewhere a lot of the times, and it might not be the right tool. It might not be exactly what you need.
Right.
But as you grow and change, then you can kind of explore. But if you have no idea what you're doing, like, I'll give you a perfect example, like picking it like an email service provider for like your mass emails. If you're doing something like that, like, there are, dozens of choices, right? And you can get in that analysis paralysis, like reading all these different blogs, which one to use. But if you're just pick one, go with it, try it out for, like you said, 3 months or something. And if it meets your needs, great. And if not, then explore other options. But don't waste, 3 months researching the perfect tool. When you could have been building your email list. Or,
exactly.
You can apply that to anything. Really.
Yeah. I used to work they're a little bit more than an email service provider, but I could sell you on one.
All right. Good deal. So you mentioned podcasts and like your quest for learning. Who are like the people that you look to for inspiration? And it doesn't have to be just about cocktails, like really just sort of, because you're a really savvy mind. You can tell that you're talking about a lot of cool things and cool ideas and stuff beyond just this idea of like, oh, I take pictures of cocktails. So who are some of those figures that you look up to, or podcasts or things?
Yeah, for sure. One I subscribe to, I just picked up a couple of his products. It's EO Fire, or Entrepreneur on Fire. I really enjoy that one. And there's another one, I believe it's called 5 a.m. Miracle, but it's just kind of learning how to kind of be super productive in the mornings. For me, mornings are prime time for me. And as of late, I've found myself starting to lose my productivity because I dive into emails right away, or I dive into social media stuff, or I just, by noon hits and I'm like, what have I really done? And by that time, like, I nap really hard. So that's one thing I will never stop. I take daily naps. And so like by noon to 2, like, I'm just like, I want to take a nap, so by that time I'm already like on the wind down, and then I start to wind back up like around the early evening and past afternoon. But yeah, to answer your question about like different resources, I like some of the podcasts. They kind of elude my mind right now, but EO Fire is one that I follow. As far as different people have been inspiration in my life, like I was saying, like early on, my dad owned his own business. And so I was kind of around that for all growing up. And I like to take advice from, I know some people say don't take advice from people. I'm not one of those believers. I think everybody has some really cool stuff to share, so I'm a big fan of just picking people's brains on stuff like, you're a wealth of knowledge on wine and what you're doing, and you have a lot of experience in certain things. And I think that's stuff that can add value to what I'm doing and vice versa, so I think conversation is really big. So other than podcasts, I really just enjoy talking with people, and, I find that everybody has a little gem to share, and I think it's up to you to kind of find a way to apply that to your life. So
it's, what conversation is a novel idea these days. A lot of people aren't doing it.
It's tough when you're kind of buried in your phone. And that's something that I've struggled with, you kind of gain an audience and you start zooming into that. And I think, it kind of goes back to even creativity. Like the more you're zoomed into like your phone or social media or something, I think you lose sight of what gave you the creativity to build that up, and so conversation's huge, podcasts, reading. But I also try not to do too much of it because I find myself getting anxious sometimes, like when you hear over and over, like you got to do or hustle or, like you feel like busyness is the answer, and you can be productive and actually have balance in your life. And I'm learning that, so it's a process, man. Every day is a little different.
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially when you're trying to create your own thing, you're in it 24/7. I know you're the apartment bartender, so work is always there. It's not like you go to a bar, right? You're just like, it's 10 feet away from where you nap, or maybe further. Maybe you're napping on the bar. I don't know.
Maybe. It depends on how many drinks I'm shooting that day.
So it's always tough, I think, like trying to pull this summit together. I know my fiance doesn't spend enough time with me.
Right.
The dog probably doesn't get to spend enough time with me. I barely see my friends. So it's one of those things where, you make those sacrifices, but then how do you reincorporate them once you sort of achieve your goals? Because I think it's important to get focused and set and like build that thing, do that thing. But then once you get like that decompression zone, like, okay, you don't have to be go forever. Go for a while, take a little break. I know once this kicks off in, mid-July, I'm ready to hang out end of July and have some fun.
I think it's hard when you enjoy what you do to stop. And kind of funny story, I went to a quick story. I was about a week and a half ago, a friend of mine was shooting a financial advisors conference up the street here at a resort, and also house sitting. So she wasn't going to be using the resort. So I was like, hey, do you want this? It's a 4-day stay at a resort. And I was like, yeah, definitely. I'll take the room. And I went there, and 2 days into it, I got bored and I left. And I was like, I find it hard to vacation, I guess. Like it's hard to take time off when I enjoy what I do so much. So, even when I'm on vacation, I'm always thinking of something or trying to kind of plan ahead or trying to create something. I have my camera with me everywhere I go. So.
Yeah, I guess that's, maybe that's the lesson here, is if it's not something you live, sleep, and breathe, it's probably not the right avenue, whether it's starting like a lifestyle blog or cocktail blog or whatever, like if it's not consuming you, there's probably something else that's another itch that needs to be scratched, let's say.
Yeah. And I think the thing that you're doing now may lead into it, so, it's, like I said, it's a process, I think you said it earlier too, like just start, if you have a curiosity, start it, and see where that goes. So,
yeah. I think so many people are afraid to start just anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I forget who it was, but a blog or someone I read, podcast, whatever, they were saying, you want to start a blog? They're like, write 10 blog posts.
Right.
Like, just go try and write 10 blog posts. Like, if you get through to 10, like, it's probably something for you. Like, if you crap out at 3, like, okay, at least now you know, like, oh, I shouldn't write a blog.
That's true. That's pretty true.
Yeah. Same thing with, I mean, if it's like Instagram or you think it's something, Snapchat, whatever, you know, the next new social media platform that comes out by the time this conference starts, do it, try it, continually do it. And I think you build momentum that way, or you just completely derail yourself, which is a positive ultimately, because then you don't have to spend your time wasted.
Yeah, exactly.
On something you don't love.
Exactly.
Speaking of starting, if you were to start over, and you've kind of alluded to this already, but what are some things you do differently?
Yeah. I honestly, man, I don't think that I would really do things differently. I think in the beginning, I really enjoyed how I went about it. You know, as far as in the beginning, looking back, I did a lot of collaborations with other people, and made different investments in myself, you know, in purchasing camera gear and stuff. I'm more of an obsessive personality. So if I was going to take a photo, I wanted it to be the best photo. You know, so I really enjoyed the way I went about it. And I really enjoyed starting off without the thought that it was going to be anything. At the time, there weren't a lot of cocktail blogs out there. And if they were, they weren't doing things in the way that I felt like food blogs do. Like, I was really more into food blogs than I was cocktail blogs. I feel like food bloggers and a lot of lifestyle and fashion bloggers, they are really good at creating visually appealing content. The thing I kind of found with cocktails, there weren't a lot of people doing things in a visually appealing way, the way there is now. Like, there's a ton now. It seems like every day another one starts. But yeah, I really want to do things differently. I think if anything, maybe I would have educated myself a little bit more on how big this social media world really is. You know, I didn't really think it was ever something that I could leave my full-time job for. Some people had mentioned it. And I remember even when I made my first $100 doing it, somebody brought up like, oh, you're going to be able to leave your job soon, just joking around. But to me, that was so far-fetched, that I look back on it now, it's still a little weird to me that I do this, but maybe I would have taken some time and educated myself on that, but I can't really say that I would do things differently.
Yeah. Can you talk about the decision in leading up to doing it full time, and maybe give us a timeline of like, okay, when did it start? Yeah. How long before you realized like, oh shit, this is really cool. This is something I could do full time, to then actually pulling the trigger and being like, okay, I'm leaving my job and I'm going to be apartment bartender.
So I took my first picture, I remember in October, 2015. And so I was doing that. I would say for a solid 8 or 9 months. And I want to say it was around end of summer last year. I had a few lucky breaks along the way. Some of the content that I posted had gotten featured on like BuzzFeed, and it hit their front page of their website. And I think that brought in like 8,000 or 9,000 in a day or 2 days. Like, it was crazy. You know, stuff like that you can't anticipate. But, and then at the time, I remember I started getting different brands reaching out to send product, which was kind of weird to me too. Like, they wanted to send free booze. So I was like all about that. And then I remember, I want to say, it was about August last year, August or September, when I got a company that reached out and they said, hey, I think I was a little past 10K. And they said, hey, we want to pay you to post about this. And so I was like, okay, you know, so I posted about it. And then I got a pretty major brand reaching out that wanted to do a year of exclusivity on a contract. And then I remember it was the Express campaign that I worked on that really started to let me know, like, this is a huge world that I know nothing about. they reached out and they're like, hey, we want to do this holiday campaign. And they said, it's in New York. And I told them, I was like, that sounds awesome. One, I don't know how you found me, but I'm super down. And, but I was like, it doesn't seem like I'm going to be able to do it because I live in Phoenix. And I remember the email back to like, oh, no worries, we'll fly you out. And this is, X amount of dollars. And at that point in time, I remember being at work when I read that email and I was thinking like, crap, I probably can do this full time. And funny story too, like with work, when I was at work too, I was in sales. So like I said, I worked at a software company, and so I was doing sales, and I found that I was spending more time doing bartender stuff, and my sales were hurting. And so the company has gone through a lot of changes as well. They had just gone through a series of layoffs and just a really tumultuous time within the company. And so a lot of salespeople were being put on plans. And so if anyone's been in sales before, they know like sometimes like these sales plans are just absolutely absurd. And it was one of those things where I had already planned. I said, okay, I planned in November or December of last year, I was like, I'm going to leave my job. And so I just kind of wanted to get through the holidays a little bit. I had some trips coming up, and I remember I got pulled into an office and it's like, hey, things have been rocky. A lot of salespeople are getting put on stuff. We're not letting you go or anything, but like, hey, we just need you to hit a weekly quota. And it was just like absolutely absurd. I'll be honest, it was super absurd. And I'm not one to back away from a challenge, but I remember my manager, we were good friends too. And he just was like, kind of gave me that look, like it's not my plan. And it was that day I was like, hey man, I actually been planning to kind of make the move. I think this is just a sign that it's probably time to just make that move now. And he was all for it. And that's kind of how I parted ways. And it was one of those things where different opportunities popped up, and I was like, okay, I know I have 2-3 months, worth to live on, and we'll see what happens from here. And then different things popped up, and it hasn't stopped since, so I'm now, I think it's been since October of last year that I've been doing this full time. So, and has no signs of slowing down, thankfully.
That's pretty awesome. So, yeah. I think it's Tim Ferriss who talks about, I think it's a 4-hour work week, like the idea of fear, like what is it that you really fear? And when you mentally prepare yourself, right? Like you had said, oh, I'm going to get through the holidays, and,
right.
Like you already planted that seed. And then, so like when things start showing up, you're like, oh, I could totally do this. And I'm
right.
emotionally ready, even though you kind of set it out in the distance. You're like, oh, now's the time. Right. So I think that's important. Like thinking about, what is on the other side of that. And the other thing too, right? Like it probably would have killed you if you never did it. Right. Apartment bartender.
100%.
So you said to yourself, okay, 2-3 months, I'm going to give it a go. I've got enough to go by. And then at the end of the day, right, like I can just come back and find another sales job or do something, right? Or maybe you just go say like, I love bartending so much, I'll be a real bartender, not an apartment bartender.
Yeah. I think there are 2 or 3 really important lessons that taught me. One is that I remember I was talking to my mom actually, and she said, Elliott, what are you most scared of that's going to happen if you don't do it? And I told her, I said, one, I think at the very end of it, like, I think I'm just scared that I won't have enough to financially support myself. And then I'm going to have to go back to doing what I was doing. Because I knew that, no offense to anyone that does phone sales, I just knew phone sales wasn't what I wanted to do. And that's kind of all I had known after I had graduated. So there are a lot of other things out there. I wasn't really trying to go back to that. So once I kind of flushed out what were my real concerns, I kind of was able to confront those. So, one, kind of write out what your real concerns or fears are, and then confront those. 2, I remember telling myself like, okay, I'll live super lean, and I'm going to give it 60 days. And I had this mindset or this attitude of meagerness. Like I was just going to have to scrape by, and it's been anything but that. And I think it was good that I was trying to prep myself to live below my means and stuff. But at the same time too, I don't think it's good to set yourself up for just scraping by or just getting by. It's maybe if what you're doing is capital intensive or whatnot. But for what I was doing, I think it's important to kind of dream big a little bit. I think it's important to, expect that you're going to do well. And then the third thing is I stopped giving myself a plan B. I just told myself, like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do whatever it takes. And whether that be getting a night job, whether that be doing something to make apartment bartender work, I decided that I'm not going to go back to what I was doing. I decided I'm not going to go back to pursuing something else unless it's what I truly want to do. As long as apartment bartender is what I want to pursue, and as long as it leads into other really cool stuff, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this work. And so once that clicked in my brain, and once I was okay with that and okay with whatever happens in my life or whatever circumstances come about, like, this is what I'm going to do. Once I was committed to it, I think I just was ready for whatever was to come,
Yeah. I think it's amazing advice for anyone wanting to start anything, whether it's wine, cocktails, or really any career path they're considering. And I love your idea of, dreaming big, and kind of creating something that isn't there, because, for people watching, it really makes no sense to be condo bartender or hotel bartender, right? Like, someone's doing it, you're just kind of a bad imitation. Although hotel bartender could be kind of fun. Do you have a spin-off? Yeah, like, do you just use the mini bar as your...
No, I was actually just at a resort this past weekend doing some work, but there are certain spirits that I would recommend people kind of pick up, and some really easy 2-3 ingredient cocktails that you can make if you're staying in a hotel. So maybe there's a hotel bartender series I should for people up there at the resorts to kind of ball on a budget instead of paying $20 for a vodka soda.
That's good advice. Yeah, or like airplane bartender. That's another one you could do.
Yeah, there's some cool cocktails. You just have to make sure that the stewardesses don't or the flight attendants don't find out what you're doing, because I've run into that a little bit where I brought some high quality, like, I had these little bottles on my bar cart. They're little, and I would pre-make Negronis and old fashions and stuff, and they caught on to it. They knew it wasn't like cranberry juice, Yeah,
that is illegal. I remember trying to do, I was working on a post that since like hit the floor, but it was about like carrying on wine and just sort of like that whole thing. And it's totally illegal to open. I think you can carry it on, right? But then it's like when you open the container is when you break the law. Yeah. So it ended in I was like, how do you have wine on an airplane? Or I was like trying to have wine in all these situations. And ultimately I was like, I can't encourage people to go out and break the law.
Yeah. It's a fine line.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's, you mentioned you've got your pre-made stuff on the side of your bar over there that you take with you. What are you drinking these days? What's interesting to you? Spirit, anything? Yeah,
for sure. I really like spirit forward cocktails. But being here in Phoenix, like, I think it's 105 today, and this is like light for us. It's about to hit the 120s. So right now, just kind of keeping things refreshing. I usually just go off seasonal ingredients, but I'm a big whiskey guy, whether it's Scotch or whiskey, bourbon or rye or whatnot. I try to find a way to kind of still drink that even in the dead of summer. So right now I made a recipe. It's muddled blackberries, it's lemon juice, it's Scotch, some Amaro Montenegro, and it's sage. And so I call it Sage Against the Machine. It's a really good cocktail. So I've been sipping on that lately. And, but I guess it changes day to day, kind of like wine, there's not probably like one wine that you're drinking that day. It's very situational to what you're eating, or, do you have company? Do you not, what's the temperature like and stuff. So, but yeah, I would say whiskey, but, man, it changes day to day.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's the same with wine. It's always about your mood, or
right.
Like, it was Friday night And I was just like all week was just craving champagne. Like
Yeah.
this, like could not shake it. And I was like, or Saturday night rather. And I was just like the whole day at
Right.
work, I'm just looking at the shelves, like, what am I going to buy? What am I going to buy?
Right.
And I ultimately settled on a bottle.
Right.
And it was awesome. I had champagne and pizza and I felt
Yeah.
like the coolest guy in the world. Like life
Well,
was so good.
that's funny because I was just gonna say if you're at Sunday brunch, you got a stack of pancakes in front of you, you're probably gonna go like more rosé or whatnot. I don't know anything about wine, or I know a little bit, but not like a ton. I feel like wine in itself is a world in its own, and that's one thing I've realized about the spirits world is like, there's each segment, like whiskey, gin, vodka, rum is its own world, and I see a lot of crossover between wine and spirits and coffee and spirits now and stuff. But you look and it's like, man, there's no way that I could learn everything there is to know. And that's the whole concept of apartment bartender. I want people to kind of feel like it's like the world of spirits and liqueurs and cocktails in general is really approachable because it's intimidating, just like wine is. I think wine is intimidating to a lot of people, so it's how do I take something that people are already intimidated by and make them feel like they can make a really good drink at home and it costs them, no money at all.
Yeah, I think, it's a great mission. It's one I share. It's, why I created this, whole summit is just to bring people together and show people like it's not that scary,
Right.
and wine expert is actually a terrible term and one we should like totally dismantle,
Right.
because it makes people so afraid of just trying stuff out and, finding out what they like and experimenting. And, it's such a cool world to get into. And like you said, you can then, my hope is that people like get interested in wine and then from there they go beyond whatever I can offer them and like dig deep. They get into Burgundy or Bordeaux or natural wine or some aspect of the industry and just like drill all the way in. And then hopefully they create their own thing. They do what you or I do and they're like the expert, the go-to person of like this particular thing. Or geez, for wine, it could be, soil types.
Yeah.
Just geek out and tell me about rocks and why they matter. Like,
it's interesting. So mezcal is an agave-based spirit, and it's something that not a lot of people know a lot about, or maybe they're just starting to find out about. I was talking to a buddy; he had just taken a seminar on it, and they were saying that mezcal is very similar to wine in the sense of it's very terroir-driven or very earth-driven. Like it's based on the region and the type of plant and like the soil or the rocks that it grows in, and even like the harvesting process and the cooking process are. So it seemed when he was explaining it, at least some of the documentaries I've seen on Netflix about wine and stuff, it just seems to be very, very similar. Maybe not so much in like the process of how it's created, but just in it being very influenced by a lot of different factors that will ultimately influence the taste and the nuance of that particular spirit. So that's the stuff that I like to geek out about. Which I'm sure you can speak to that with wine. There's so many fun things about it, and it's a creative outlet and a good foster for my passion. So
sure. I totally agree. What's the best or greatest cocktail you've ever had? And it doesn't have to be just because of how it was made or whatever. It could have just been something that surprised you or something you remember because of where you were. It could have been like a gin and tonic in your, mom's backyard, right?
Yeah. That's a great question. And you'll appreciate this one. So when I first got into cocktails, I remember I bought my first magazine, my first issue of Imbibe magazine. And I was on my way to Chicago, and actually in that issue, they had 10 best bars in Chicago to visit. And I was looking and it gave the addresses, and Billy's Sunday was on it. And I typed in the address and I saw it was 5 minutes away from my mom's spot. And so at the time when I started doing apartment bartender, my mom didn't really understand, or my family didn't understand in general, you know? So like your friends and family are just like, hey, just don't become an alcoholic. And you're like, there's such a difference between craft cocktails and binge drinking and alcoholism. You know, but it was just, people just relate booze and lump it in, you know, it kind of has that negative stigma. But I remember we went to Billy's Sunday and I ordered an old fashioned, and I had taken, my mom had come with me there, and we set up at the bar. It was one of the first times I set up at the bar. I remember the guy that was the bartender, his name was Steven. I just remember he was just super friendly, just very educational, like took his time. It was a busy night, but he still took his time to talk to me, still took his time to kind of to make sure that my mom knew what she liked and walked her through the menu, because I mean, she didn't know anything about it. And you know, so I remember he brought out that old fashioned. It was the first time I had really seen clear ice in a cocktail. And they did something a little different with the old fashions, and they ended up giving me the recipe for it. But it's like, was the old fashioned like mind-blowingly different than anyone I've ever had? You know, maybe from Applebee's, yes. But you know, if it's, you know, it was just a really good drink. So I would say like that old fashioned was, and still is to this day, like my favorite drink at Billy's Sunday, because of the experience, because of me sitting at the bar for the first time, and just, it was everything that confirmed why I was doing what I was doing. You know, it was the camaraderie, it was the experience. And after that, you know, my family really understood, like, oh, I get now why you like this world. And so, yeah, man, that, I don't know if that answers your question, but that to me, that moment will forever, like, that will be my favorite drink ever, you know, just because of what that represented.
Yeah, right on. It sounds pretty amazing. You know, one of those moments, right? You can remember probably so much more about that night, you know, all the different details. You sort of touched on them, but I'm sure you could, you know, talk about, you probably describe Billy Sunday's interior to me as if we were both standing inside of it, and, you know, what people were wearing. And it's just, you know, that's what got me into wine. You know, it's and same with spirits, cocktails. It's more than just a beverage, right? It's more than consumption. It's all these other cool things that are involved that make it so powerful. So
I think just to kind of touch on that real quick, it's, you know, it helped me to understand, like, especially behind the bar, like, it doesn't matter if you make a good drink if people don't enjoy sitting at your bar, you know. And also for me and what I'm doing, it doesn't matter. Like, I could certainly make cocktails that have ingredients that most people can't pronounce or don't even know what they are, but people start to disconnect at a point. So like you said, I think the drink has to represent, like, how does this ultimately connect you more with someone else, and how does this add value in some way? And I think for the industry, especially, whether it be wine or spirits or beer or coffee or whatnot, I think hospitality and customer service and value has to be the foundational thing to what you're doing in any pursuit. And I think that's what Apartment Bartender, that's what I really want people to know about it. And what I want them to know about my journey is that, like, how much they influence what I do, because I really want to make sure that they don't just see it just like another cocktail recipe. You know, life is hard enough. Like, if they can get like a good laugh or a good recipe or a good story or something that's going to make their burden a little lighter, then I feel like, yeah, this is something I'm going to keep pursuing. Because at the end of the day, does the world need another like cocktail recipe? Like, no, you know, that's kind of what I tell myself. But I'm like, if I could use this platform to, you know, inspire someone else to create or, you know, pursue something that they've been putting on hold for a while, you know, ultimately that's what I deem as success.
Awesome. I can't think of a better way to wrap it up. So that was well said. But before I let you go, how do people best get in touch with you?
Yeah. So you can find me at apartmentbartender.com. I'm on Instagram as well at Apartment Bartender, and at YouTube at Apartment Bartender. So just type in Apartment Bartender and you'll find me. And so, yeah, but I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you.
And you, Elliott. Really just an awesome interview with Elliott Clark. I hope that his message and story resonated with you. So if you love this episode, you can go to roadtowineexpert.com and learn more about Elliott. You can also learn about other guests who have similar journeys to Elliott, albeit a little different, but there's plenty of starting over at the roadtowineexpert.com. And one more thing, if you're still there and you kind of skipped the beginning of the episode, I'm doing a giveaway once we hit 1,000 downloads. So if you love this podcast, share it with your friends. Let's get that download total up. And then I'm going to give away $1,000 of Road to Wine Expert stuff. What kind of stuff? Books and resources of friends and guests of this podcast. Many of these books were influential to my career, so I always just love books, and I just want to give them away. They're so powerful. And books and guests changed my life. So if I could help someone find a book and find some inspiration, it'd mean the most to me. So share the Road to Wine Expert. Go find your favorite episode. If you like this one, go grab the link at roadtowineexpert.com/Elliott-Clark and send it to a friend or someone else who's looking to start over and help them discover a new career path, whether it be wine or drinks or, I don't know, basket weaving, whatever their passion is. Like, go crazy. Life's too short. All right. I'll see you next time. Thanks again for listening. I'm Brian McCann, and this was the Road to Wine Expert podcast.